You see, what if the dream does not come true? Another problem we have often, we believe in the American mythology of progress, and many of us just automatically assume that. There's just also this belief in the invulnerable and being able to advance his interests, and therefore, as long as we hang in with this guy in protecting himself, coincidentally, he'll protect us. There is no law and rule in the universe that says the white man is going to rule forever. As we have history, it's going to be very clear that the civilization, wise people prepare for bad possibilities. Even if we were to hold hands with little white boys or white girls, and there was all this great Martin Luther King dream, that still does not say that we should not prepare for the other possibilities, because they can occur. Recognize that all of these dreams are often based on economic systems, and when economic changes come about, these dreams turn into nightmares. This problem we have, in particular in terms of African Americans, is very much connected with the economic situation in New York City. As the question is, we educated 100% of Black and Hispanic children in New York City. They read well, great graduates, and plus the other people who are also graduating at the same time. You see, we assume simply because we can getting more degrees that there will be automatically more jobs out there. But that is not necessarily the case. You can educate a vast number of Black and Hispanic children. You still have not solved the problem that there may not be a market out there to absorb these kids when they get out there. And you will see then some more furious confrontations taking place of a prepared group of people, an educated group of people who now cannot find jobs. And if you think the other one unwise, you got another thought coming. So consequently, it becomes wiser for them to pretend that we have.
I could expect.
I'm talking about life itself. As I've often said, when we look at this situation, the military situation, the situation of pollution and so forth, what African nation, if the Caucasians decided tomorrow that they wanted to re-enslave African people, what African nation or group of people could militarily defend the interests of Black people? With the kind of space weaponry we have floating around in the atmosphere, what African nation could defend militarily its own people, the people in the world? In what way has all of the college education and the degrees in engineering and so forth we've gotten advanced our ability to defend ourselves militarily and in other ways? Let me look though quickly at something else, and let's try to context education in terms of this. I often talk about what I call constants.
Now he was speaking in this is in the 90s, but I mean on the continent of Africa itself, I mean there has been very little advancements as far as individual countries building militaries. So the question is still there, like you just said. If this is hypothetical, just hypothetically speaking, if the white man, or if they really, really wanted to enslave Africans again, which African country could defend against that? The onslaught of enslavement. Which African countries has a military that could really defend against being put back into slavery? And we all know the answer. And I don't think there's any country that could just fight back and just like, no, you're not going to enslave us and actually win. You know, and actually have enough might to win that war. And that's crazy. Mhm. I be thinking about that shit time, yeah. Like, these motherfuckers still to this day can do whatever the fuck they want to do, honestly. And that's to an extent our fault, yo. That looks so weird because I toned the canvas blue. So it's kind of hard to see because the canvas is blue and I'm painting blue. But essentially, this is what I wanted because it's blending in so good like this. Yo, Friday after work, I filled up my gas tank. Yo, I did put like premium gas in there. I don't like using like the low grade. Like I always put like what is it, 93 or 97. I decided to put like 97 in there to fill it up. $53, bro. That shit took 53 fucking dollars to fill my tank up. Man, what the fuck, yo? I don't know if it's just my imagination or what, but like when I use like high octane, it just seems like it does last longer. I don't know. I might be just fooling myself. That's what it feels like. It just feels like it lasts longer. And for you run out of gas, but still like damn. I hate paying $53 to fill up my fucking tank. And it ain't like I got a truck or nothing. I just got a fucking car. Too much red.
A child reaches a major milestone in its development. It can recognize constancies in the world. That is, when it recognizes how the world stays basically and essentially the same, even though it appears to be changing. And even though in terms of its sense organs, it is changing. If you were to look at the images of this room on my retina or cornea, the room certainly would not have its rectangular shape, because it would actually be shaped very oddly. This door patch, as I move, each time I move, the door would change shapes. Even though perceptibly, as far as I see it still stays the same. But actually, in terms of the image that's projected on my retina, it is constantly changing with every movement I make. And not only is it changing relative to me, but its shape is changing. And if I were to go on just what is thrust on my retina, I would have to lean sideways or all kinds of ways trying to get through this door. But what happens is my brain corrects the image that is projected on my retina. And it maintains a constant image of this door, despite the myriad of changes that may be projected on the retina of my eye. So it permits me then, despite where I stand in this room, how I move, to move very efficiently through that door, because my brain is maintaining a constancy of perception despite some obvious changes as projected on the retina. And it's very important that we keep this in mind, because if you don't maintain a perception of the constants, then you will be deceived by every change in the world. You know, someone says the French have a statement that goes, the more things change, the more they remain the same. You know, and often many things change so that they can't remain the same. And often we have been deceived by the changes that have happened, let us say, in this country. We look at slavery time, we look at Reconstruction, and we break history up into these various parts. And often we compare what opportunities we have available to us today against when we were in slavery and against when we were segregated and against us. And it looks like we've come through tremendous changes. And we get the idea that the world has changed drastically. And of course, this feeds into the mythology of progress. That if it's changed this much since that time, it's got to be better further on down the road. But then you must recognize that there are certain constants that are still behind these apparent changes. And I'll mention some of the constants here. There could be others, of course, you come through. When you talk about the European, you must recognize that the European is only about 10% of the world's population. And that's a very important concept to keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen. It sounds like a coincidental statement, but it's one that's important because a great deal of European psychology and orientation to the world is based on their minority status. We as Africans and people of African descent are a part of the world's larger majorities, not minorities. The European is a small group of people. It is a minority group of people. And that minority, its minority status has shaped its psychology and its orientation to the world, both consciously and unconsciously. And often then for this minority to maintain its control over the world, it must, of necessity, maintain an enormous military power. And this is one of the constants that it's going to seek to maintain no matter how many black boys and girls you hold hands with. No matter how many white people you sleep with to marry and all of this kind of stuff. This is a constant. Military power. An overwhelming military power. As a matter of fact, it was a part of that military power that has you here today. And you can see today the greatest problem in this country and in Russia and in other European countries involves money spent for military outlays. A vast consumption of the country's wealth and resources goes into military resources. And despite the fact that you tell these people you have enough weapons now to kill each individual 700 times over, they still rob everybody to build up this military power. Because they recognize being such a small group that the only real advantage they have over these other large majorities is an overwhelming military presence. And now you can go to all of these schools and everywhere you want to go, but that's a constant. That constant has been there since you first met the white man, and as a matter of fact, it has not been diminished since. And the intention is that it will always be that way. Even when you join the military, you'll still be a part of that whole situation. set there. That's one of the constants that maintains that. The other constant, of course, is economic power. Maintaining economic control of the world. That control was being established when we first met this man in Africa. It has grown since that time, and it is still maintaining itself at this time. You can get as many jobs as you want to on Wall Street. You can work for IBM. You can work for all the rest. But the constant is that they're going to still be owned by Europeans. That they're going to still be controlled by Europeans. And that ownership and control is going to be used to manipulate the psychology of non-European people, to maintain the subordination and servitude of European people. You think now because you have a choice, you can choose computer engineering and you can choose this and that somehow you have it over your great-grandfathers who were slaves? Let's look at that constant. Of course, not every black slave was a field hand. We had roles there too. Not every black slave was a house servant. You had carpenters, you had you had people who were up to date, and I'm speaking of slaves now, in terms of crafts and skills, who worked in mills and factories and all the other kinds of things. And yet, the ultimate thing was they worked for the benefit of their masters. They turned their profits over to their masters. That relationship has not changed one whit. The idea that because you got a degree in computer engineering or whatever you may call it, that you somehow have changed from your great-grandparent who might have been an iron worker, the skilled one, that this has changed is only an illusion. Because as your great-grandparents worked to enrich his master, so when you get out of this school, you're going to work to enrich your own masters. Oh, they're not going to hold a whip over you. They're not going to, be as brutal perhaps, but the same essentially there. And therefore, it is the intention. As a matter of fact, the integration of our people into these jobs is still being done to maintain a grip on the economic system. So what do? As oftentimes I said, you are being educated to put a black face on white power. I was reading something the other day. We were talking about conditioning, and in my psych class the other day, and how you use conditioning to manipulate desires and so forth in people, and to try to induce people to buy various items. And of course, it talked about the Coke campaign, how Coke would start off its campaign with Bill Cosby's show, how it would be identified with intimate groups and so forth, associations, how Michael Jackson, I believe, would be used as such, how Michael Jordan, the basketball player, would be used and shown drinking Coke and so forth, and how a black advertising agency would be hired to project this image to black people. It had Fernando Valenzuela for the Hispanics. It had reggae music for the Caribbeans. Very cherry Coke. Someone told me that cherry in the Caribbean also has to do with being high, doesn't it? Someone ever heard that? So Coke is very cherry. And yet you see here then an association of a product with people's culture and with their backgrounds and with their values as a way of manipulating the mind, manipulating their desires and creating desires in them and increasing their consumption, and using then black agencies and Hispanic agencies and Asian agencies, and hiring black vice presidents. And it always amuses me when you read about the vice presidents of large corporations, and you always get to this black person who's the vice president of special markets. Of course, you know that he is the black man on staff whose special job it is to show these people how black needs and moods can be manipulated to earn greater money for the white company. So in the end, while you may point out that now you have black vice presidents, you have black advertising agencies and how far we've come. When you get down to the very bottom dollar, it is still the old game of extracting resources and money and everything else out of black people and using them to enrich the economic power and resources of Europeans. And of course, the Europeans found out that it works better when you put a black face in the position to do this. So ultimately, he maintains his economic control by projecting and educating black people to do it. It's the same old game as neo-colonialism. I don't think there's no coincidence that you have neo-colonialism occurring pretty much in parallel to so-called integrationism or assimilationism in America. The same kind of game is going on, putting black faces on white power, because when you look under that black face, you'll still see economic control and economic manipulation taking place. I was looking the other day, sometime back, I was reading the New York Times about how many scholarships were available to black South Africans. In fact, there was more money available to black South Africans than there were black South Africans to take the money. And you say, well, now why is this? I mean, they're looking for them. But why wasn't this money available 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 30 years ago? Why is it being available now? Of course, the obvious situation is here that when the Europeans see that they will lose political power in South Africa, what they want to do, of course, is educate its next leadership generation. And of course, knowing how we eat up white degrees, we're going to, when these people go and get these degrees out of these Eurocentric institutions, we're going to respect them so highly, we're going to put them right into office, and they're going to bring their educated values and orientations right with them and help to maintain and repress the group in the interest of their European tutors and mentors. So now the money is being available. You read colonial history, you'll see often as the Europeans turned to loose the so-called colonies, they established schools and institutions so that they could educate the leadership class. And of course, we can see what kind of problem that is involved. And a similar game goes on within this particular culture. By the way, you say, well, you know, we have to play that kind of game. Well, I have to play that kind of game and he's not going to do it. But there's no assurance that you're even going to eat. If you had read last month, in fact, still this month, Black Enterprise magazine, you would have seen the lead piece in that magazine dealing with, what is it? How to survive, and something like, how do you survive the cutbacks in industry? And there's a whole article on there advising blacks, how do you get severance pay from these companies as they cut back. As a matter of fact, Graham says in that piece that 500,000 middle management jobs have been knocked out since the early 80s, ladies and gentlemen. That there is a severe cutback. He's speaking very clearly in terms of his own class interest. He says the black corporate class, whatever kind of class that is strictly endangered. Then he goes on to say that also means danger for the black people as a race. But of course, he deals with his class first. And so what he's concerned with is, he goes on to say further in that article that there's concern whether there will be any black who's going to head a Fortune 500 company by the year 2000. And he mentions the idea that there are actually fewer black college graduates today than some years back. And the problem, he says, is how are we going to protect these the interests of these black college graduates when the ones that are currently in the industry are now on their way out, and so there'll be no one there to help pull them in at all. And so the idea that the degree is going to assure you some kind of job is very, very questionable, period. Because there's a shrinking in terms of American economic might and the growth of the American economy. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, as I've often said, civil rights laws, affirmative action laws are no guarantee at all for you getting any kind of job. Too many of us have been raised to think that laws will protect our interests. Laws are not going to protect your interest one whit. Laws can only protect, and laws don't protect anything, as a matter of fact. It's people who protect interest. And the day that the establishment decides that it is not going to enforce the law, then the law is of no account. We saw that in Reconstruction. When Washington decided that it would no longer support the Reconstruction laws and so forth, then the whole thing collapsed. It took 100 years to get over that, to get back halfway where we were during Reconstruction. We look at the Reagan administration today. It just decides that it is not going to enforce the rules. The rules are on the books. But when it decides and sends out a signal that it's not going to enforce the rules, then nothing happens. And believe this, ladies and gentlemen, if it ever gets to a point where there's a choice between the European feeding his child and feeding yours, no law in the world is going to make this man feed your child first. None whatsoever. So the ultimate thing is you cannot have faith in laws and things of this nature. You ultimately have to have power, real power. And to a good extent, you see, education ultimately has to be about that. Preparing a people and setting a people up to have real power so that they can protect their biological and other interests in times of stress. You see? And as I said earlier, if it doesn't do that, then it is not a sound education. I don't care how well you speak, what college you went to, who taught you as professors. If it doesn't add up ultimately to the protection of your interests, then it is not ultimately a sound education. So we see that as a constant. The economic constant has been there. The technological constant is there. That is, again, in order to maintain its power, the Europeans must maintain a technological edge. And you can see what kind of worry the Caucasians now are having as Japan trims their edge in technology. In fact, I often chide my people, you say you want an equal education of white children, you're out of luck already. If you make them equal to white children, you're still behind, because they're behind the Japanese. So you get an equal education with them, you're still in trouble, because that's not going to protect you. These people are trying to see to their own survival, economically and socially. So you have to set your goals now even higher than that. You're going to have to be smarter than the white, and you're going to have to be smarter than the Japanese. You see? And just talk about equal education is done at a time like this, when the people you want to be equal to are themselves unequal and backwards. And yet many of us are still looking at these institutions that are showing us every day how they're falling behind in the world. We still see them as providing us with a so-called adequate education. You have to recognize, ladies and gentlemen, you've got to compete with not only white folk, you've got to compete with many other ethnic groups in this world. And consequently, you've got to prepare your mind to compete with these other groups. Like it is, you've got to do it. This is the reality of the situation here. And then in terms of what's already sinking is a recognize that it must maintain this technological advantage. And no matter, so even when it hires you, and even in the time yesterday, how many of you read the piece on superconductivity? Read the New York Times on Tuesday. It's good, the science section. You should read it, if no other day, read it on Tuesday. Good pieces of psychology, education, and science. And yesterday was dealing with superconductivity, which represents a tremendous change in technology. And there's a heated rivalry between nations over who is going to build these metals that they can be virtually non-resistant resistant to an electrical current at room temperature. It has vital implications. But as I read through the article, of course, I see all of these woos and lees and homes and all these other kind of people at where Houston University, Cal, so forth and so forth. What is going on here? You see a situation where these people now have not become so-called liberal lately and started hiring a lot of Asians because they love them. But they are hiring them because if the hiring them will keep them in the running technologically, then they will hire them for that purpose. You see? And so some of you will get hired because of your brain, but the ultimate constant is going to remain the same, to maintain the technological edge over African peoples and to maintain dominance over African people. So even as you're integrated into the system because of your great brilliance, still recognize ultimately the game is that your brilliance will be used against your own people. So now we're going to educate these Koreans and we're going to educate these Asians for what? To maintain the technological edge over whom? The Asians themselves. You see, so even the hiring of black people and African people, the integration of black people into the economic so-called system and so forth is still there to maintain the economic constant and is you're getting educated, then you must do that. Now, I'll show later on here how you see this kind of thing set up.
What up, boo?
Note that the plan is this.
Bye.
See, some of us, we've gotten through, and some of us are fed into individualism, you see, by saying, well, you know, I got here back then.
Shit, this is my damn second stream, you know. This first stream cut out on me. I got biscuits, gravy, sausage, French toast, strawberries, and eggs, yo. It's a fucking super breakfast. Damn, and now I got a black screen. I don't know what's wrong with the stream this morning, yo. It's the second time, yo.
Talked about Jesus too much.
Mm-hmm. Listening to that Ricky Gervais. Mm-hmm. Yep. Alright, like I said, this is the second time I started this stream. I'll end the stream and I'll start it up one more time because I'll probably be here for like another hour or so maybe. Let's see if we can make it work again. I'll be right back.